Usually when we describe a book, we talk about it either in the context of genre or of plot. So we might say, this is a historical novel about a pirate trying to steal a fortune from a merchant, and then they fall in love. I don't know. This is usually how we talk about books, right? But we rarely talk about books in terms of vibes. That's what you'll find on the internet, on the subreddit, books that feel like this. I have been obsessed with this subreddit for the past few days, so I thought I might make a video about it. What it is basically people posting photos or images, and they're asking for book recommendations for books that feel like these pictures. Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. Let's take a look at some books that feel like this. The first one is recommend me a sapphic book that feels like this. And you can see it's definitely dark, moody, Victorian, Gothic. And clearly the setting here is some sort of maybe a dilapidated castle or a Victorian manor house. There is only one novel that comes to mind at these pictures, and it is of course Camilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. This is a novel from 1872. It's the story of a young girl called Laura who lives in a remote Austrian castle with her widowed father. In the course of the novella, it really is a novella, it's a very short book, encounters the mysterious, sexy, maybe a little bit vampiric Camilla. This is a book that's recently been gaining some recognition, I suppose, as the pre-Dracula vampire story. It's a short little book. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, but it is really fun if you're after some Victorian lesbian vampires, which the person who posted this clearly is. The next person is looking for a book about being cozy inside during a snow or rainstorm. Let's look at these pictures. There's several of them. So here we see some fairy lights and a snowy landscape outside. The next one is this lonely hut in the woods, clearly during a snowstorm. Then we've got a similar picture. We can see some lights outside. It's clearly dark and moody, but also kind of cozy. More dark and moody, but also kind of cozy with some snow drifts and a lonely house at the edge of a woods, sensing a theme here. And here we've got some thunderstorming going on outside while we as the viewer of this picture are clearly inside in the dark. And here we have a illustration of the same kind of thing. So we again are getting a particular mood suggested here. And to me, these images immediately look dystopian. So the book that this made me think of right away is Life as We Knew It by Susan Beth Pfeffer. This is a young adult novel from 2006 in which we follow a teenager named Miranda who has to survive a climate apocalypse. I don't know if just my mind went straight to dystopia when looking at these, but that's what I'm thinking of. So there's this climate apocalypse that basically happens after an asteroid hits the moon and sort of knocks it out of its, I don't know. You know what, the science of this is really not important because the main bulk of the book is concerned with this apocalypse as it unfolds in a small suburban town. Even though this sounds very dramatic, the book itself is actually quiet, slice of lifey, but also with a darkness and heaviness that comes with having a book set during an apocalypse. It really beautifully combines those young adult themes, you know, Miranda trying to grow up and finding herself, while at the same time basically being a survival novel. I really enjoyed this when I read this a few years ago, though then I went on to read the sequels, which are bad. I did not like the sequels, in particular the third book and last book I think in the series. I really hated, but this first book I thought was really well done. This third post wants books about an apocalypse caused by a virus. Now that is an absurd idea I've never heard of. So here we see some pictures that I'm pretty sure are taken from, or at least heavily inspired by, The Last of Us, which has got these weird mushroom zombies, very unsettling. Yep, here we see some infected This is a sort of like a public safety poster about the virus. So this has obviously been done several times in the history of zombie fiction and in the history of apocalyptic fiction. Ew, that's gruesome. Yep, we got some zombies trying to get in through some sort of fence. We've got an empty city that's been overgrown and, you know, is sort of falling apart. Here we've got a city that seems to be falling apart in a much more dramatic fashion. I don't even know what that's supposed to be, like an X-ray of a zombie, I suppose. So anyway, this is all a bit grisly, but this immediately made me think of what I think of as the original in this specific type of zombie apocalyptic fiction, and that is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. This is a novel from 1954. Technically, the apocalypse is not caused by a virus, but by a bacteria in this novel, but I think we can probably forgive that. And it's a bacteria that turns the population into zombie vampires. The book follows a survivor called Robert Neville, who tries to live his days without dying of either loneliness or despair or of the zombie infection. You've got the despair and loneliness that's in some of these pictures, including these like overgrown human-made structures. You've got the body horror of something like this. And you also have the sciencey aspects, because throughout the book he tries to research a cure for this bacteria. I think it's a really excellent novel. It's obviously very violent, very dark. It invented a lot of the tropes that we know from this kind of story. So if you like a bit of zombie apocalypse, if you enjoyed The Last of Us, then you'll definitely like I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Here we've got someone looking for a book about a herbalist woman living in the forest, and the tag also says witchy vibes. So we've got a beautiful calico cat that's just hanging out there looking gorgeous. You've got a beautiful long-haired woman that's just hanging out there looking gorgeous. We've got some medieval looking markets. We've got a woman with a beautiful but impractical hairstyle gathering some herbs, some sort of naturey embroidery, a hut in the woods, who wouldn't want to live there, an owl in a tree, another woman looking at peace with the universe while standing in a light-flooded wood clearing, walking barefoot through some moss, and more gathering of herbs in a basket. Once again, we've got some clear vibes, but what is a book that matches those vibes? Well, immediately this made me think of the novel Cersei by Madeline Miller, which is a Greek mythological retelling from 2018. It's a sort of retelling of the Odyssey, but from the point of view of the Greek witch Cersei. This book covers more than her encounter with Odysseus though. The story takes us all through her unusual childhood as a demigod, all the way to the island where she lives out her lonely existence. She is, you know, the original mythological witch, very much this sort of woodland, living on her own, being happy on her own, nature, witchcraft, gathering herbs. It's all of these pictures. The next request is for ancient forgotten worlds and history. So we've got a person walking through some really mysterious looking landscape with an elephant. Here we've got someone sitting on the skull of maybe a dragon. So definitely getting mystery vibes. This looks like some fan art made for The Legend of Zelda. Here we've got like a statue of a god. It's all very mysterious and very naturey, but also kind of cozy. I like this one of someone sitting on top of an old caravan, just having dinner with a cat comfortable in the corner, and there's a tea kettle. Yeah, I like the look of this, and this also immediately reminded me of one specific book, and that is A Psalm for the Wild Build by Becky Chambers. This is a novella from 2021. And while it's not the first work of fiction to count as solar punk, it certainly is one of the first high-profile stories to be marketed as such. What is solar punk? well, it's like steampunk. It's nothing like steampunk. It's basically a sort of future utopian world that's solar powered, that's sort of post climate change, post pollution. This book is cozy, it's deeply philosophical, it's almost entirely plotless, which is not an insult. I really enjoyed this book. This is the story of a monk named Dex who travels the wilderness beyond their idyllic home city in the search for the meaning of life. So it's a lot of beautifully written scenes of travel through this post-apocalyptic but beautifully serene world, while they also drink a lot of tea and ask questions. This next one just says, books that feel like Fleabag. And we've got some fan art of the Fleabag It'll Pass scene, a picture of Fleabag and another picture of Fleabag. I mean, this is really straightforward. This is less about the images, right? This is more about, well, books that feel like Fleabag. Interestingly enough, I've made a whole video specifically about classics that you might like if you're a fan of Fleabag. So I'll just link that down below and leave that request here. This next post specifically is after books about female rage. And here we have an image of biblical Judith decapitating her rapist. Yeah, so very straightforward, just female rage, and more specifically female violence. And the book that comes to mind when it comes to this sort of thing is obviously The Power by Naomi Alderman. This is a novel from 2016, and it really is very of its time. It's science fiction set in a future world where women have developed the power to basically electrocute people. This reads like an homage to The Handmaid's Tale in terms of the way the novel is framed. If you remember The Handmaid's Tale, it has a framing device of a future historian looking at old records, and The Power has a similar sort of thing. I think it's directly referencing The Handmaid's Tale. It's very violent, it's very fast-paced. I don't think there's much more to the book than that. It's an interesting concept, but it's not groundbreaking in the same way that The Handmaid's Tale was. Still worth a read if you're after some violent female rage novels. The next one just says, books that feel like this. Let's look through the pictures. So we've got a woman walking up the staircase, a statue in a maze, clearly in a garden somewhere, a warped staircase that's painted from a really dizzying perspective. We've got a ship in the distance with some optical illusion trickery, some flowers and a bed underwater, again some optical illusion trickery here, a castle in the distance beyond a fog-covered lake or the sea, again what looks like a maze at night with a fountain, all very mysterious, a lonely figure walking through an empty ballroom, and whatever the hell this is. These pictures are weirdly disconnected, like they don't look a lot like they belong together. There's not going to be a single book that encompasses all of these different images, but I was immediately reminded of one book once again. In particular with these first few pictures, this, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Probably one of the most recommended books on BookTube. It's from 1938. It's moody, it's dark, it's suspenseful. I feel like I don't really need to say much more than that. So let's move on to the next one. Here, someone is after a novel about living alone, and it says brackets, little to zero romance. So we have a woman in some casual clothes in her kitchen, in her enormous kitchen, eating something straight out of a bowl with a dog in a basket next to her. We've got a woman in bed with a book next to her. We've got someone playing the ukulele on a bed, all looking very cozy in a messy room with an IKEA wash basket in the foreground. And we've got this what looks like a sort of Tumblr inspiration picture that says, "Be alone, it's peaceful," of a woman hanging out on a cliff top. So again, the last one sort of doesn't feel like the others, right? These are all domestic scenes. And then this is someone outside in the wilderness. Once again, one novel immediately came to mind when looking at this, and that is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This is a book from 2017, caused quite a bit of a stir. I think it won the Costa Women's Fiction Prize. It is a lot like these pictures, but it has a decidedly darker edge. Very cozy, a slice of life, but it's a slice of a life that's by no means untroubled. It's a story of the titular Eleanor, who lives, I think, in Scotland, and her trying to cope with life, basically. I think if these images appeal to you, but you're not afraid of reading a book that explores some darker aspects of life, while still having a very cozy feel, then I think you'll enjoy that one. The next person is after books that feel like this. That's the name of the game. Let's look at these images. You've got two women running up a hill. I think there was a Kate Bush song about that. There's two women in elaborate dresses walking hand in hand through a picture gallery, but like a picture gallery that's clearly in some sort of castle or manor house. We got two women staring into each other's eyes in front of an overgrown fountain. All these pictures, by the way, have a decidedly dark vibe to them. As does this, they look like they're in wedding dresses running through the woods. That's probably from the same photo shoot as the first one, because it looks like the same women still running through the fog, lying in the ground. So this is like romantic, but also dark, right? You know what I'm going to say, right? The only book that comes to mind is Fingermith by Sarah Waters. This is a historical novel from 2002. Sometimes you just come across a novel that's so perfect and you want to tell everyone how perfect this is, but you can't say anything about the actual plot of the novel because it's such a tightly plotted page-turner that every spoiler counts. So what can I say about this? It's historical fiction set in Victorian England about crime, about sex, and about sanity. And it's also an absolute masterclass in plot twists. And it feels like these pictures. So go read it. This next person is after books that feel like dystopian, uncanny suburbia. And these are images of, I mean, this doesn't look so much like suburbia, but actually more like a village scene with some nice detached houses in the evening. There's nothing particularly spooky about them at first glance. Well, I mean, there's, you know, lightning striking in the distance, but there's certainly something weird and uncanny. I mean, certainly about this picture. Here we just have a door. Like, it's all sort of mysterious and weird. This is a car that's sort of fogged up in the night. Here we have some mysterious bonfires in people's front gardens. Yeah, you get the idea. Okay. These also seem to be images drawn by the same artist, or at least with a very similar style. Again, I'm not getting suburbia much from these pictures, more village life, but there's definitely something going on. There's lots of books that feel like this, obviously, but the one that I want to recommend in this case is The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham, which is from 1957. It definitely has this uncanny English village vibe about it. This is about an idyllic English country village that wakes up to find all of its women are pregnant. Sounds like a horror novel? It basically is, though it's filtered through John Wyndham's signature, almost cozy, detached, sarcastic, stiff upper lip style. So this English village becomes, you know, a very strange place, both for the inhabitants, in particular, obviously, for the female inhabitants, but also for observers from outside it that try to figure out what is going on. And then when the mysterious children are born, well, you can imagine they're not your average village kids either. Okay, this next one also just says books that feel like this, brackets general fiction. Let's look at these then. Wow, someone's drinking too much coffee. We've got someone vandalizing a Greek statue. We've got what looks like England in autumn. Definitely, immediately thinking dark academia, obviously. We've got a group of people drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, probably while having some deep intellectual discussions. A church or university building. and some leather-bound books about ancient Greek classics. Yep, so this to me and to you probably screams dark academia. And while the first book that comes into mind with that tagline is of course A Secret History by Donna Tartt, this actually makes me think of a different and much more British novel, and that is Possession by A.S. Byatt, which is from 1990. It's dark academia, but British, as these images clearly are. This is the parallel narratives of two academics who study the lives of two Victorian poets. So we follow both the academics, and through their research we get to know these poets and their story. This is moody, it's atmospheric, it's very nerdy, and it's very passionate, of course. It's also very well written. I think we'll leave it there. This was fun. Hope you enjoyed it as well. If you want more books that feel like this, then do check out the subreddit in the description box. If you want me to do another video like that, where we just look at some of these images and try and come up with books that feel like that, then let me know in the comments. Two things to note before we finish this video. The first one is that a lot of the books that I recommended, right, I looked at these posts and then thought of the book and then made a note of that. And then I looked at the comments, and for the vast majority of the time, the book that I was thinking of was also the book that someone else was thinking of. So it's kind of confirming to think that, oh yeah, this book doesn't just feel like this for me, but also for lots of other people. And so that was interesting. And the other thing I want to note is that for a lot of these books that I talked about, I have made separate review videos, and you will find those linked in the description box. So if some of these books have piqued your interest, then do have a little look down in the description box to see if I've made a full review video about that, and you can look at that as well then. Thank you for watching. Bye!